What is going on, everyone? This is Andrew O'Connell with Pristine Capital coming at you with yet another market recap video. I'm also the Director of Research at LeDuc Trading. It is January 6th, 2021. What a crazy day it was. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this content, and I will continue to make it for you. Today we're going to be talking about the price action, the indices, volatility. We'll go under the hood as we always do and check out the sectors and style factors. We'll look at some trades. We'll talk about the craziness, in the afternoon, and we'll wrap up some options order flow. But before we jump in, quick risk disclaimer. Nothing in this video should be construed as investment advice or recommendations. Please follow your own trading plan and your own risk parameters. And last but not least, do not YOLO your entire account into any one of my trades. So let's jump right into it and let's check out those headline indices. So yeah, it was just crazy political event after crazy political event today. So we had the Georgia Senate runoff occurring, and there were a lot of participants in the marketplace that thought that might end up being a pretty bearish event. And you can see, we had a big scare on the first new day of the trading year. And, we pierced through almost the entire monthly value area. Then yesterday we had a pretty nice bounce back. And we closed above that 5-day exponential moving average. And everything was looking good. Now today we ended up getting that follow through. And what's super interesting is, I think it had something to do with a very similar dynamic to the presidential election, where people think, it's going to be a big deal. Like, oh, if there's a blue sweep, the market's going to go down, so I need a hedge. And then as soon as that happened and there was no, risk off event, you end up getting this blow off where, all those hedges have to come off and unwind and so on and so forth. So we ended up getting, at one point, it was like S&P 500 up 1.5%. The Qs were almost flat. IWM ended up closing on the highs. But yeah, for a while, the market was really elevated. So we ended up, closing the day with the S&P 500 up 0.6%. We had the NASDAQ QQQ down 1.39%. So a big disparity there. IWM small caps up 4.09%. And we have the Dow Jones up 1.44%. So this, as of now, if I'm looking at this technically, everything looks, just fine. We didn't close, necessarily on the highs, but we did have a really nice green candle here. So you can see, even today we did dip into this monthly value area, but you can see we're sort of, every day, if you look at the low of the day, January 4th was down here at like 36.52. Then the low of the day was, 36.72. Now today the low of the day was 36.85. So we continue to progress upward. So everything is looking bullish on the technical front. Now let's see the Qs. Yeah, the Qs were a much different story. So you can see here the Qs, opened, within the monthly value area, auctioned up. And it looked like, okay, the Qs are going to close above that monthly value area high. But then around 3 o'clock, we started getting the news of, people are storming the Capitol and there's all this madness going on. And the Qs, which were originally the weakest on the day, ended up selling off the hardest, into the close. So down 1.39%. IWM, this thing is just bulletproof. Congrats to anyone that has been, holding on to IWM, really trading this one. You can see explosive move higher on very high relative volume here. If you look at all these candles, this is by far the biggest one. And I remember saying, in yesterday's video and a couple others, oh, IWM is starting to lag. We didn't even close above the monthly value area high. But today just took that whole dynamic and just flipped it on its head. And if you look, we essentially took out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days of price action. A lot of, candles were pretty much taken out and surpassed in one fell swoop. So this is very interesting. And even when we had that crazy news out of DC, the small caps still remained pretty strong. So today was definitely a bit of a rotational day where we had some themes doing very well and some others clearly lagging behind. Dow Jones actually doing something a little bit different. Looks like a nice breakout for the Dow. So we'll have to see if it actually gets any follow through. I kind of doubt it. Yeah, we'll see. Dow Jones still in the grand scheme just trending sideways to higher. So let's look under the hood, because I think that's where we can see the real essence of what happened today. So I'm going to pull up our heat map over here. And you can see in the morning it looked like, oh my gosh, things might end up going really bearish. But you can see the real weakness was just in the mega cap names. So you can see Apple down significantly, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Really those FANG stocks, or those MAGA stocks, whatever you want to call them. Whereas everything else was pretty strong on the day. So pretty interesting, where it was like, okay, we're selling out of the mega caps and we're going risk on again. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Into year end, there was a lot of new positioning into these mega cap names. And then if we look at, let's take a look here. So if we look at these sectors, we had this solar stocks and really just clean energy in general having a massive day, up 8.67%. At one point, these stocks were up like 12% on the day. Same thing with cannabis stocks, that YOLO sector ETF, that I'm positioned in with long calls, up 5.77% today. So that was, another really nice day. At one point, it was closer to 10% up. You can see regional banks had a really nice day. It's like those cyclicals and value plays, retail, financials, all doing really well. Basically, like all the recovery themes. It was like the recovery, reopening trade plus the Biden trade with like the clean energy, the cannabis, etc. So really interesting. But these are, multi-standard deviation moves again. So I don't know, what unhinged this. I'm guessing it was that Georgia Senate runoff. Yeah, this was a pretty remarkable day. So yeah, we had, in terms of our style factor leaders, we had, like I said earlier, the cyclicals and the high beta stocks really running with the ball today. You can see growth took a small hit and momentum. So yeah, this looked, in my opinion, a really risk-on day, which is why, it was sort of off-putting at the end of the day with that drama in DC. But I think, at the very least, we were talking about this earlier with Leduc trading members, where I was like, clearly the market doesn't care about, if it's Democrats or Republicans that are in control. You can see here the market is doing its own thing and, going risk on, even though there's been a lot of people, rightfully so, that they were saying oh, if there's a Democratic, blue sweep, we could have issues in the markets, but, clearly you can't trade your political views in this market. And it was pretty interesting. A friend of mine was talking to me, yesterday, and he's like a market veteran. He's been in the game for, much longer than I have. He brought up a really interesting point, and he was like, for 2020, if somebody had given me next year's paper ahead of time, I wouldn't have been able to make money off of it. And it is so true, because if you were to look at there's a deadly pandemic, this economic destruction, we're going to have this crazy tense election period, all these different things, you might think okay, the markets, in that year probably went down a lot. But we've had, just a spectacular year in the markets for 2020. So yeah, that's why for me, trading the price action is so important, because, if you look at the fundamentals and the narratives going on, a lot of it, doesn't make much sense otherwise. So yeah, very, very important. I just thought that was a, pretty good perspective on things. So if we look at some of these things that did really well today. So clean energy stocks. Yeah, this iShares Global Clean Energy ETF, really nice breakout And at this point, it's very tough to, sort of buy these names up at these levels. Same thing with MSOS, the cannabis ETF for the United States. Really nice day. YOLO, which is the one I have my calls in. Another, really nice day. But of course, like we closed, nowhere near the highs. There was some profit taking here. But I didn't sell any of my positions there either. So we had some strength there. Some names that I was trading today. So I just thought, today was like such a gift where like the past couple of weeks have been a bit of a struggle. Like, I've been taking stop losses, just trying to manage risk. And it felt like the wind was at my face for the past couple of weeks, not at my back. Whereas today it was like a get out of jail free card for almost every position that, was not like a mega cap tech name. So I was a net seller throughout the day. And I remember like telling Leduc trading clients like, yeah, this one, it's almost like a gift to just like sell into. And that was before that drama was developing. So I sort of got lucky where I sold some things like towards the highs of the day, without really knowing like, oh, okay, there's going to be some craziness that unfolds later on. So some of the things that I traded, in the morning, I took a stop on my PayPal calls. And this is something I'm probably going to make an adjustment where like not have my live stops open in the first couple minutes of trading. I'm actually kind of glad that I got stopped out. So I got stopped out for about a 20% loss on these PayPal calls. But yeah, PayPal, I do love the company. But yeah, it's clearly not showing any relative strength, given I think that rotation, into the smaller names. So I took a manageable loss there. Kind of glad I got that one off my book. Another one that I traded was Morgan Stanley. Yeah, Morgan Stanley. I had my March calls on the books, and I had the 65 strike March calls. I talked about this in my market recap video, but I purchased those, I believe, on this candle right here, just because Morgan Stanley was showing, some nice strength on this day. And I sort of sat with them for about maybe 2 weeks. And we got this blow off move. I ended up using a trailing stop, towards the high of the day. And I exited this position for a plus 70% winner. So that was, a really nice one for me. J&J, I exited this one as well. And this one, still looks really good, to be honest. But J&J, I had the 155 strike calls. I believe I purchased them on like one of these candles over here. I forget which candle I purchased them on. But I closed those calls out for about like a 22% gain. Really just because we got awfully close to my R1, pivot level. And I was like, you know what, I'll use a trailing stop for this one and take myself out, as well. Got taken out for, 20% and change on that one. NTLA was one that I traded today. And this one I got super lucky with. So NTLA, this year I'm trying to trade stocks that not only do they have a good technical setup, but I also want something that like fundamentally is just very strong, and there's either like a good story behind the stock or just like a really long trend that I can participate. Because like what I did a lot of in 2020 was like, okay, I'm trading this technically. I may or may not know what's really going on with the company. So as soon as I hit my target, I'm basically like out of the stock. What I want to do a little bit more in 2021 is like, okay, I know this stock can do really big things this year. I'll probably trade around my position. Hopefully something like NTLA is a stock that, I can buy it in consolidations, trim some, hopefully like keep re-adding to it, stuff like that. I want to get a little bit more purposeful in what I'm trading. So NTLA is one. I added this one maybe at like $62, like when it first started moving on the day. And I took a quick target at this value area high. And, my plan is like, okay, take a quick target and then just let the rest go. So that's what I did. I pretty much let it go. And, we'll see what happens with this position. But this ended up being, a trade that just paid on day one. So pretty happy with this one. And I just used the common shares for that one. Enphase is one that, I put on a couple days ago, as I talked about in this market recap video. End phase, I added, one of these candles right here. And this one, because I was preparing for like clean energy. If we get the blue sweep, clean energy should do well, cannabis should do well. And I luckily was in position for end phase. End phase is another one where I think it's a market leader. And, we'll see how long I can hang on to this one. But I would like to ride it, as long as I can. And then let's see, Expedia continues to perform for me. I have my leaps here. And Expedia, you can see getting that really nice follow through day. And we took out that VPOC up at 147, as I had, talked about yesterday. And Expedia, my calls are, so far out that, I didn't take a target or anything in Expedia. I really think that as we start to roll out this vaccine, there's going to be some nice moves for, travel stocks, like there's reopening plays that actually have some fundamentals behind them. And Expedia, I think, fits in that category. So I'm glad I positioned in this one, a couple weeks ago, back on these candles right here. So that one was doing pretty well. I still have my Fubo butterfly working. Talked about PayPal, talked about YOLO. So yeah, for the most part, those are the trades that I took, but I really was just like selling off a lot of positions throughout the day. Those were sort of like the highlights. But I cleaned a lot of things up, really just like, because we had that strength. And then even later in the day, once all that madness started happening, JMIA was another one that I closed out. And I closed this one out. I'd been trading the common shares in JMIA. My original plan was like hold this one for the long term, see what happens, and sit in through the ups and downs. But JMIA, to be honest, like it just broke my moving averages. It's within the monthly value area. It's not really showing relative strength. And even yesterday, we couldn't really get much of a bounce. So today I sold JMIA somewhere around like the middle of this candle. Looking at it now, I'm kind of glad that I did. So I'll have to see if it holds the value area low right here. Then who knows? Maybe I sold it right near the low. I really don't know. But I'll jump back into it if it starts to perform again. I sold that one for literally like a 2% gain. And at one point it was at close to a 20% gain. So I could have used a trailing stop up there. So that's another thing I'm thinking about. Okay, so those are a lot of trades I put on. I actually put on a SPY hedge as well towards the end of the day. And I tweeted about this. I was like, I just have a feeling like lightening up into this like potential coup is probably going to end up being, like one of the worst things you can do. Because I added my hedge on, pretty close to where we ended up closing, to be honest. So with that one, I might end up just immediately closing that out tomorrow. If we get like a nice follow through and we see some strength. But it just felt like one of those things where like, if I know there's essentially like a coup on the United States government, and at the time I didn't really know how it was going to shake out, I would almost just feel like a fool if, say, the market did have like a correction and I didn't put a hedge on. So I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to throw a hedge on and, hopefully I lose money on the hedge. That was sort of where my head was at with that. So that's about it for the trades. Let's take a look at the options activity for today. I'm going to pull up my Cheddarflow here. Okay, so let's take a look. We're going to filter for the orders $1 million and above because those are really the orders that are going to move the market. And you can see we had a bunch of orders today. Yeah, this is a lot of activity actually. So we had some Square calls coming in. Those came in right at the end of the day. So I actually want to take a look at what Square is doing. Yeah, and Square, it had a pretty big dip for a couple days, and now it's just holding that 20-day simple moving average. So this looks interesting. I guess somebody is positioning in square for February. They bought the 190 strike calls. They bought, in the money calls. That's a relatively conservative play. QS, somebody was buying puts in here. So I thought this was another interesting play. Yeah, and it looks like they made money on it. Wow, so they really killed that. So you can see QS, has fallen about 50% over that actually. Oh my gosh, this thing peaked at 132, and I remember people were still buying calls in this thing at the highs. So like I was seeing like $1 million call orders coming in literally at the high. So it's not like these guys that have the big call orders always get it right. Sometimes they get it wrong. So yeah, we went all the way down to 40, looks like around like, yeah, $47. So over 50% loss in the matter of days. Now we're getting a bounce, and it looks like this player faded that bounce. So it's a really interesting play. Then we have some Apple calls coming in. Apple, let's take a look. Apple looked pretty weak today also. I do have my Apple March calls that, it's sort of getting towards the end of my rope here. They are March calls, so if Apple, decides to perform, those can still come back. The question I'm really wondering is like, is this actually a good place that I want to have my capital? And really like where my capital is going to work the hardest for me. And as of right now, it's not really looking that way, so I might have to readjust that. And then I see some orders for Hilton coming in, the April of 2021 calls. So that's another, reopening play. Let's see, Hilton. And another thing to keep in mind is as earnings season approaches, a lot of these, COVID loser stocks are going to have very easy comps in terms of their earnings. Whereas those COVID winners, the COVID winners are going to have to comp up against ridiculous earnings growth, whereas these, it's going to be like they're going to be comping up against when they were shut down. It's actually okay, so that won't be this quarter, that's actually going to be the following quarter, excuse me. So yeah, those comps, they're coming down, but essentially they're looming in the not too distant future. Let's see, we have Hilton, CDLX. Okay, and some booking calls. So this is actually like in line with what I was saying with Expedia. Booking is, a very similar play to Expedia. So to be honest, like you could really use them, interchangeably almost. And you can see the patterns look very similar. Expedia is actually outperforming it now. But yeah, you can see this one, we have a call buyer coming in. I do think that companies like Booking and Expedia, I don't see why they won't have good performances in 2021. I could be totally wrong on that, but it just seems like that's where the narrative is going to go. And then Enphase, check this out. So this is awesome to see. I sort of got lucky putting that position in. I guess I won't really call it luck. I did my homework and positioned in it. I guess like fortunate that these call buyers are coming in, where you can see they're coming in for May, which is good. And they're buying the 270 strikes, in size. So you can see Enphase right now. It's trading for $203. So that's deep out of the money calls. And look at this volume spike. That's pretty incredible volume. So while this thing is overbought in the short term, I'm likely just going to hold it through a pullback and just try to ride it, as long as possible. So we'll see what happens. And as always, I'm going to post my affiliate link for Cheddarflow in the description to this video if you would like a free, 7-day trial. Oh, and then one last one, I see CGC, which is another cannabis name. You can see they bought the 30 strike calls. Oh, wow. Yeah, so this one, another, just incredibly overbought. The chart looks almost, very similar to Enphase, to be honest. But yeah, it looks like they're playing for continuation. Let's see. Oh, and they bought, dang, these are short terms. They bought these at 11.35. And this is for, January of 2021. So that's a pretty short term play. They threw down $1 million on it. Let me see, at 11:35, what was this thing doing? I'm going to go to my 15-minute chart. Actually, I'll get real crazy and go to the 5-minute. So at 11:35. Okay, right here. So wow, they actually timed this pretty well. They got right in, on this candle right here. And, towards, at the time, the low of the day. And we ended up riding this thing up. Then we sort of got, all that madness towards the end of the day, and we got some profit taking. So, this ended up being a pretty good execution where, they got in, basically we closed right where they entered. So we'll have to see how that one goes with CGC. But that about does it for this market recap video. We'll just have to see how all the craziness plays out politically. What I'm starting to think is like, although it's a big deal for the country, what happened today, it's not really a good look. I think the market is really just looking for more money printing. And I could definitely see like, maybe in the big picture, people will think twice about, should we have this much capital allocated to the United States, like that sort of thing. As of right now, I would not be surprised if the market just shrugs it right off. It seems like all it cares about is just stimulus, money printing, etc. But with that being said, I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.